The midday sun hung mercilessly over the Texas plains, its heat shimmering across the dusty air like the breath of an angry god. The small frontier town of Dry Creek had gathered around the wooden platform in the square, the kind of crowd that came when curiosity outweighed conscience. Boots shuffled, whispers stirred, and a tension heavier than the desert heat settled over the people. At the center of it all stood a young woman, the so-called Comanche bride. Her wrists were bound in front of her, not in iron chains, but with rough rope that bit into her skin. Her name was Naya, daughter of a proud Comanche chief, captured by bounty hunters after a raid no one remembered the truth of anymore. Her eyes, dark and unyielding, stared past the crowd, toward the open horizon, as if freedom itself stood just beyond it. The auctioneer, a man with a greasy hat and a smile too wide for decency, shouted above the murmurs. "A fine woman, strong as the wild she came from. Who'll start the bidding at $50? His voice cracked, echoing off the saloon walls, but no one spoke. Even the drunkest cowhand shifted uneasily. Buying cattle was one thing, buying a human soul was another. A hush spread through the crowd, thick with guilt and judgment. Men looked at the ground, pretending to study the dust. Some laughed nervously to mask their shame. The woman on the platform didn't flinch. She stood tall, her braids falling over her shoulders, the faintest glint of defiance in her eyes. She didn't cry, didn't plead. She was the storm before it breaks. At the edge of the crowd stood Ethan Cole, a man most folks called the Quiet Rancher. He was known more for the silence that followed him than for any words he spoke. Ethan had lost everything, his wife, his child, his peace, to a gang of raiders 2 years back. Since then, he had become a ghost in his own land, speaking to no one, living off the dry soil and the memories that refused to die. But today, something pulled him to town. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the way the wind had whispered through the canyons that morning. Maybe it was fate, dressed in dust and sunlight. As the auctioneer's voice grew desperate, "Come now, gentlemen. $40. 30. Ethan's eyes locked on Naya's. And in that moment, two broken worlds collided without a word. Her gaze met his, not in fear, not in hope, but in recognition. A silent understanding passed between them, something ancient and wordless, two people who had both lost everything. Two souls who knew what it meant to stand alone. The auctioneer spat in frustration. "No takers. Not one brave man among you." He laughed bitterly, his voice carrying the sting of mockery. "Guess she ain't worth much to civilized folks." The crowd shifted again. Some chuckled, others looked away. That's when Ethan stepped forward. The wooden boards creaked under his boots, the sound sharp in the silence. Every head turned. Dust swirled around him, carried by a sudden gust of wind. He didn't speak. Didn't have to. He simply walked to the front, his hand going to the inside pocket of his worn coat. The auctioneer blinked in surprise as Ethan pulled out a few crumpled bills, not much, but enough. "I'll take her," Ethan said quietly, his voice rough from disuse but steady as stone. The crowd erupted in murmurs. "That's Ethan Cole," someone whispered. "Ain't spoken in months," another added. The auctioneer, seeing a sale at last, nodded quickly. "Sold." To the Quiet Rancher, he declared, slamming his hand on the wooden post. The sound echoed like a gunshot through the square. Naya's chin lifted slightly. Her eyes searched Ethan's face, trying to read the intent behind his calm expression. He didn't look at her with pity or ownership, only a strange kind of understanding. He reached up, cutting the ropes from her wrists with his knife, then turned away. "Come on," he said simply. She hesitated for a moment, then followed him through the silent crowd. No one spoke. No one dared to. The only sound was the wind sweeping through Dry Creek, carrying away the last traces of shame and dust. They rode out together, the horizon blazing gold before them. For a long while, neither spoke. The sun began to dip, painting the sky in streaks of blood and amber. Finally, Naya broke the silence. "Why?" she asked quietly. Ethan's eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. "Because no one else would," he replied. But inside him, something deeper stirred, something he hadn't felt in years. A flicker of purpose. Maybe even redemption. They reached his ranch as the stars began to appear, scattered like diamonds over the black sky. It was a lonely place, a house weathered by time, surrounded by endless land. "You can stay here," he said, dismounting. "No one will bother you." She looked around, cautious but curious. "And you?" she asked. Ethan hesitated, then met her gaze. "I'll be nearby." He turned toward the barn, leaving her standing by the porch as the night settled around them. Inside the house, she found a blanket and a chair by the window. Through the glass, she could see Ethan sitting outside by the fire, staring into the flames like a man searching for ghosts. The wind carried the faint cry of a coyote, lonely and distant. Naya pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time since her capture, she felt something strange, safety. And, in that fragile silence, something unspoken began to form between them. Not love, not yet, but a fragile thread of trust, woven in the quiet of a desert night. Days turned into weeks, and on the quiet plains of Ethan Cole's ranch, the wind began to sound less like loneliness and more like life returning to a wounded soul. The Comanche woman, Naya, worked silently but fiercely, mending fences, tending horses, and learning the rhythm of the land that was now her refuge. Ethan would often watch from a distance, pretending to fix the corral or check the cattle, but really, he was watching her reclaim her strength. She was no longer the woman who stood on that auction block, she was fire wrapped in silence. At night, she'd sit by the porch, gazing up at the stars and humming an old Comanche song. Ethan didn't understand the words, but he felt them, deep in the places where grief had buried his heart. For the first time in years, the ranch didn't feel haunted. It felt alive again. But peace on the frontier was a fragile thing, and fate had a cruel habit of testing the ones who least deserved it. It was near sundown when trouble came. A trail of dust rose on the horizon, riders. 6 of them. The same bounty hunters who had sold Naya like cattle. They rode with rifles slung and greed burning in their eyes. "We came for what's ours," the leader sneered as they dismounted at Ethan's gate. Ethan stepped out, his hat low over his eyes, his hand resting near the revolver at his side. "She ain't yours," he said quietly. The men laughed, spitting into the dirt. "Everything has a price, Cole. You just paid the wrong kind." Naya stood behind the door, her heart pounding. She knew those men, their cruelty, their laughter, their darkness. Ethan's voice was steady. "You'll turn around and leave." The air went still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then the men reached for his gun. The first shot cracked like thunder. Dust exploded from the ground, horses reared, and chaos tore through the calm of the ranch. Ethan dove behind the trough, firing once, twice, his bullets finding their mark with deadly precision. The fight was quick, brutal, and loud. Naya grabbed the rifle from the wall inside and burst out the door, firing at the shadows near the barn. She was no helpless bride now, she was her father's daughter, fierce and fearless. Together, they fought like two halves of the same storm. When the gunfire stopped, silence fell heavy and final. 4 men lay dead in the dust. 2 others rode off bleeding into the desert, their shouts fading into nothing. Ethan stood breathing hard, his arm grazed by a bullet, his face streaked with sweat and dirt. Naya ran to him, her hands trembling. "You're hurt," she said, her voice breaking. "Just a scratch," he muttered, wincing as she tore a piece of cloth and pressed it to his wound. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the weight of everything they'd survived pressed down on them like the sky itself. For a long time, neither spoke. The fire in the distance crackled softly, and the wind carried the faint scent of rain. Naya's voice was quiet. "You could have let them take me." Ethan shook his head. "Not again," he said simply. "Not anyone." That night, rain finally came, heavy and cleansing, washing away the blood and the dust. They sat by the fire inside the small cabin, the flames casting gold light across their faces. Ethan's voice, low and rough, broke the silence. "When I lost my family, I buried more than them. I buried myself." He looked at her, eyes shadowed by years of grief. "You reminded me there's still something left worth protecting." Naya's gaze softened. "And you reminded me not all men carry chains." For a moment, the world outside disappeared, no auction blocks, no gunfire, no ghosts, just 2 souls that had found each other in the wreckage of fate. Days later, when the sheriff rode up to investigate the shootout, he found Ethan mending the fence and Naya watering the horses. The sheriff tipped his hat. "Heard you had some trouble," he said. Ethan nodded. "Trouble came. Trouble's gone." The sheriff looked at Naya, then back at him. "She's stayin'." Ethan glanced at her. She met his eyes and gave the faintest smile. "Yeah," he said quietly. "She's stayin'. When the sheriff rode away, Ethan turned to her. "If you want to go, I won't stop you." Naya stepped closer, the wind lifting her braids like threads of night. "This isn't your home anymore," she said softly, placing her hand over his heart. "It's ours." From that day on, the ranch came alive again, green shoots rising through the earth, laughter echoing across the valley where there had been silence. The townsfolk, once whispering about the Comanche woman bought at auction, now spoke of her with quiet respect. They saw her riding beside Ethan through town, head high, free, untamed, and even the cruelest tongues fell silent. The men who once spoke to no one now had someone who understood him without words. And though the past still lingered like shadows on the horizon, they faced it together, 2 survivors who had found peace not through escape, but through each other. As the camera would fade to the wide Texas sky, the narrator's voice would return, deep, steady, and full of meaning. Sometimes, destiny doesn't arrive with thunder, it comes quietly, like a man who just steps forward when no one else will.